Did you hear that mockingbird sing last night? Honey, he was singing so sweet in the moonlight, in that old magnolia tree, busting his heart with melody. Everything I have done has been through chance. Everything I've planned in my life has never worked out. So I've been on the stage. I lay right down and die and die. I took up boxing, had about 12 fights, and every one was eventually finished in the first round.
Despite such diversions, Brian May has in fact spent most of his adult life pursuing one main interest: buying, restoring and selling Bristol motor cars.
Before I got involved with Bristol, I had a number of cars, most of which you could drive flat out for a good proportion of the time and not break the speed limit. Then a friend of mine came and said, he said, "Are you interested in a Bristol?" I said, "Bristol? What's a Bristol?" Well, he said, "My boss has got a Bristol made by the Bristol Aeroplane Company. It's all aluminium and it does 100 miles an hour." I said, "Yes, yes." I do like craftsmanship wherever it is, whether it's in bricklaying, carpentry or mechanics, and there's a lot of craftsmanship that went into Bristol cars because, I mean, they use aircraft engineers. So there's design quality as well, and it's a very, very usable car. It has a certain amount of testosterone and estrogen, I think, and you can experience that if you rub your hands over the car. You'll know what I mean. The first time I saw this car was back in 1969 when I brought it from Frank Butler. He was a local Bristol owner living in Solihull. He used it as an everyday car and also for racing and sprinting and that sort of thing. I bought it from him, I remember, for £150. And for some unknown reason, I had it sprayed a bright kingfisher yellow. Why? In the midst of time, I cannot imagine. However, it did attract the attention of the next purchaser, which was a young medical student at the time, Richard Latcham.
I lived on a narrow boat just down there, and we used to stagger up in the morning, my friend Nick and I, and a bit late for lectures. I remember the guy on the boat next door. He always used to come in and say, "I'm sorry I'm late, my boat sank again." I wanted a car, and the ones that I noticed were beautiful always seemed to be Bristols.
He made an appointment to come and see the car, and I remember he came with his mother. He looked round the car, and I can remember it to this day. His mother said, "Richard, darling, don't you think you should buy a Morris Minor first? And you can always go on to a Bristol later on." And I can remember sort of crossing my fingers thinking, what sensible advice, I hope he doesn't take it. And he didn't.
Brian was to me, was quite a formidable character then. And I remember timidly saying, "Oh, I think I'd like to get the AA to come along and see if it's all right." And I've never forgotten Brian saying, "Well, if you want to get the AA, you can't have it."
We developed a very strong friendship which has lasted to this day, and Richard is one of my best friends. And during that time he came and gave me a hand doing some of the repair work here. Do you know what you're doing there?
Yes, I do.
Brian used to, well, supposedly help me do things. Usually when I asked him how to do something, he would say, "Oh, I don't know really," and just watch while I found out how to do it, actually. And I remember asking Brian, "What's the money like?" And he said, "Small and brown."
The car briefly returns to Brian in the late 70s, before being sold on to ex-rugby international Peter Bell.
A great drive by England, trying to give England retreating possession, Wales retreating possession. That's Bell diving for it, number 6. And Morris was almost over on the blind side.
Bristol cars are sort of a bit of an emotional thing, really. I mean, they sort of get into your blood, and once you've had one, you seem to collect them over the years. I had an old Bristol 405 saloon. In fact, my girlfriend at the time wrote it off. It's certainly altered a lot since I had it. It was green in those days, and it was a little bit frayed around the edges, I'm afraid. It was a bit tight to squeeze for me, and I had a rather large girlfriend, and it wasn't the most practical thing that we had.
Savage throws west palms. Coolman didn't get there quickly enough. It's kicked on by Morris. This is Bell in trouble.
By the pass.
I make it that we've played 3 minutes of injury time.
I can remember now why I sold this.
Over the next 15 years, the car returns to Brian's ownership on a further 3 occasions. Each time a little work's done and a little profit's made. But after a prolonged absence in the early 90s, the car comes back as the victim of a renovation project which has gone horribly, horribly wrong.
The front section had been ripped off all the way down here. This had been lifted off and torn back as if they used some giant tin opener going right the way back here, but it hadn't been lifted off carefully. It would just been all bent back and ripped and torn apart. The same thing happened down here. A lot of the metal had been ripped around, so we had nothing to work from to restore the car. In fact, it was virtually a write-off.
What's needed is someone who's built a successful career. Someone who can afford to fund a full restoration. Someone with a special affinity for the car. An ex-medical student, say.
Lindy, did you hear that mockingbird sing last night? Honey, he was singing so sweet in the moonlight.
Brian and Richard completely rebuilt the car in just 6 months. Although some familiar features still remain.
Where the Perspex back window goes into the frame, it always used to leak, and I remember putting some clear goo that you get at Halfords or something in there, and it's still there. It's rather nostalgic to see. It never worked, it still leaked. Well, I'll never sell it again.
It's nice to know that the car is finally back on the road again, where it could so easily have been destroyed. It was very, very near to being written off. But now it's all back again, and it's, you know, for me, it's a success story. Blowing across that old bayou, he seemed to say, I love you so, honey, that's the way I love you. My Lindy Lou, I'd lay right down and die, if I could be that wind a-kissing you, my little Lindy Lou.